Okay, so here we are a couple of days later. I've had a chance to sort of get over the initial shock of coming home to finding this damage in our front compartment here. So basically, I don't really know how to. I mean, obviously, I have to fix it. But moving forward with regards to the videos and stuff like that is concerned, I mean, I'm not going to, I think, spend a whole bunch of time sort of showing what I have already shown in the previous two, because the install itself was good. Now, there was a couple of things that maybe could have been done to have prevented this, but the actual like form factor of the way that everything was working was not the issue here. So that raises the question, I guess, well, what was the issue then? What happened here? And basically what happened here, and I'll kind of, this is the point of ignition here. Now, I wasn't in a very good mood when all this came to light as having happened. So immediately after this happened, I spent some time tearing everything out of here. All the burnt wiring and stuff that was involved. And mainly my thought process behind that was, like, A, I knew I had to fix the wall. I wasn't sure to what extent. And B, I wanted all that stuff out of here so that I could clean it up really good with something that smells better than the smell of burnt wires. So I didn't film any of that because it wasn't exactly the most pleasant job I've had to do in the last while, and I just wasn't feeling very talkative at the time. But anyway, back to what happened. So where that ignition source is on the wall is exactly the footprint surrounding the 24 volt to 12 volt buck converter that was meant to take the 24 volt voltage out of the big battery bank and convert it into the 12 volt that the trailer requires to run the lights and all that stuff. So the good news is that the failure was isolated to that component. There's no damage to the AC system in the trailer. There's no damage to the DC system in the trailer. The problem was completely isolated to that component. So why did it happen? I mean, I have a few ideas as to why it happened. Go back in time a couple of days, I guess, to when previous to when this happened. And what I was noticing is that after I sparked the two terminals installing the battery sort of towards the end of the last video, and there was clearly some damage there on the terminals, but after hooking it up, it appeared as though everything was still working. It was still putting out 12 volts. I just went with it. I shouldn't have done that. I should have tested it. I should have ordered a backup. I should have not used it. I should have had a fuse on its way to it and from it, so that if some kind of catastrophic failure like this happened, that the fuse would blow before any major damage occurred. I've got fuses now that aren't here yet, but today's job is going to be repairing the damage that was already created by this. But anyways, what I noticed was that the voltage started to fluctuate a little bit more than it was before. So you would turn the lights on inside, and suddenly the voltmeter that I have in the trailer would go from 12.2 to like 11.9 or something, which is what was odd, because I mean, the LED lights that are in these things don't use a heck of a lot of power. So for there to be that much sag involved, especially on a lithium ion phosphate battery, didn't make any sense, but I didn't really pay any attention to it. The second thing that I noticed was that we had some pretty poor weather during the time immediately following getting all this in here. And so I had noticed that the battery wasn't increasing in voltage at all from the solar panel, and just kind of chalked it up to the fact that we didn't have very good solar production days to do that. The day before this happened was a pretty good day for solar. So I came home from work and checked it, and the voltage, the charged voltage on the battery was exactly in line with the 12.2 that was coming out of that was supposed to be coming out of that buck converter. So I found that odd, because it's like, well, how can that be? I mean, it's been charging all day. The solar controller that was in that corner shows that it's registering the solar panels. It shows that there is apparently a charge coming in. So why is this? I mean, even if it wasn't fully charged, it still should have managed to be higher than the 12.2 that was coming out of the buck converter. So basically, I started thinking at this point that perhaps the problem was, in not really understanding how a buck converter works in great detail at the time, was that perhaps the battery was allowing current to come out of it and feeding back into that converter, and then the converter, or that buck converter, was radiating that voltage off as heat through the heat sink, and that was causing the battery to stay at the level that it was. And it was just maybe the buck converter trying to equalize the voltage between the two. That's not what a buck converter is designed to do. Its sole purpose, now I know, is that it is supposed to do nothing more than take 24 volts, turn it into 12 volts, and that's it. It's supposed to be a linear path. There's not supposed to be any way for the voltage to come back into the converter at all. So during this time, though, not really understanding that, I ordered a diode, a block diode off of Amazon, thinking that I'll just hook that up in line on the way to the battery, and that will stop any of that feeding back into the converter that I thought was causing the problem. So I get that ordered up, and thinking that that's going to be the solution, and then this happens. So there's a couple of things that, like I said, I should have done first with regards to the fuses. The actual buck converter itself, I ordered on Amazon. I ordered it. It was a 1200 watt output buck converter, which at the time I just didn't have any concept as to how many watts I was going to need to run the important things about the trailer, like the slides going in and out and things like that. 1200 watts was far overkill for any of that. Fridge, slides, all that stuff. There's no way that it could have used that much. So first of all, I oversized it. Second of all, when I went back to my Amazon transaction and actually looked at it, the reviews on it, and I mean, I'm not much of a video editor or anything, but I'll see if I can figure out how to put a picture of this on here somewhere. The reviews on it were horrible. And basically, there was a whole bunch of people that were explaining that it wasn't working for them. It was causing all kinds of problems. And ultimately, I mean, there was no descriptions of anybody having a fire started by it. But there was plenty of descriptions of people that basically ultimately just got frustrated with them and threw them in the garbage. So usually I'm pretty good at checking that kind of stuff, and I will make a decision to not buy something based on how other people's experiences with it went. But for whatever reason, this particular time, I was excited about the fact that it was about the same price as the Victron one that I have coming in, but was capable of putting out twice as much power, which in the end wasn't even necessary. So that was, you know, I guess I don't know, I'm kind of all over the place as far as keeping tally of all the things that, you know, probably should have been caught or done differently here. But that, I would say, is probably one of them. I shouldn't have bought it in the first place. Second of all, when I arced it hooking the battery up, I should have tested the resistance on the 12 volt side versus the 24 volt side to see if there was the difference between the two sides that you would expect to see if it was functioning normally. And I should have just thrown it out at that point if there was something that seemed out of whack there. Now, so I didn't do any of those things. So here we are. Now, why did the failure occur? I mean, what occurred in there to, to cause this to happen in the first place? And my thinking with the block diode was sound because, 12 volts and 24 volts current don't understand, which way they're supposed to go. They just travel, in a circuit unless they're diverted around something or told that they can't return on the same channel that they went through in the first place. So the purpose of a block diode is exactly that. It allows positive current to go one direction, but it won't allow the same positive current to travel back on the same wire. So my thinking with installing that made a lot of sense, and it's exactly, the problem that ultimately I believe caused this. Now, it's not because I didn't have the block diode in the first place, though. The problem is that the actual buck converters come designed with these in them already, and I'll see if I can figure out how to put this on a screen as well. But basically, this is a basic wiring diagram for what a buck converter does. So on the right hand side here is the 12 volt coming out. On the left side here is the 24 volts coming in. Now there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on here, but one of the key sort of functions of a block, or of a buck converter rather, is this right here. And that is the diagram for a different type of block diode than what I ordered, but a block diode all the same. I can't remember the correct name for this. It starts with an S, which is why the straight line on the top of the little triangle there is sort of S-shaped. I'm not going to try and say it because I'm just going to get it wrong. But anyways, anybody that understands this kind of stuff will know what it is right away. So what I think happened when I arced those two terminals together is that this blew inside. And now was allowing electricity to run in reverse. Now, the second thing that's important in here is this. And this is a MOSFET. And what a MOSFET is designed to do in a buck converter is turn current on and off at a certain frequency to allow the rest of this stuff to do its job, so that what you end up with at the other end is 12 volt current instead of 24 volt current. So it's my opinion that once the voltage started to travel backwards through this, that it eventually took its toll on the MOSFET, defeating its ability to do that. And the reason that I think that happened is because once I came out here and kind of had a hard look at everything and assessed the damage and tried to get my head wrapped around all this, I noticed that the solar controller, which was still functioning at that time, was reading that there was 24 volts of current traveling into it. And that current was traveling basically out of this whole mess that had happened out of the battery, which isn't even a 24 volt battery, and it just basically overloaded the whole thing. And it was getting a read off of the rest of the system, which was now traveling freely at 24 volts from the one side to the other side and giving a 24 volt reading on the other side, which is obviously, if that had been doing its job correctly, which of course it wasn't because it had been on fire recently, would not be able to happen. So I don't know for a fact that anything that I just said is 100% accurate. I do know that whatever did occur involved the 12 volt conversion process to fail. Because there was no fuses in place to prevent both sides of the system to overload that device, it basically turned into a giant toaster. Although I wasn't here when this happened, I would expect that that failure probably took no longer than maybe, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes or something for it to completely destroy itself, and severing the connection from one side of it to the other, and then allowing it to basically stop being a toaster. So by the time I got home and found what was left of the buck converter, it was cold to the touch. There was nothing else going on, but nonetheless, it was impossible for me to understand fully what was going on just with the shock of it all. So I started ripping the batteries out of here and pulling charred wires out and stuff like that, just to make absolutely certain that there was nothing live in here that could possibly touch something else or whatever. So now that I've got everything out of here, I've got it all sort of in my shop. It's everything other than the converter itself looks like it fared fairly well. The inverter was pretty close to this, but it wasn't damaged. I had the cover off of it. There's nothing inside. The amount of soot that was on it was minimal, and was mainly isolated to just the cover. I couldn't find anything inside of it. Everything seems to be okay there. So I have no reason to believe that the inverter was damaged, and the wires that were hot during this had nothing to do with the inverter. So there should have been no heat created inside the inverter from this. The solar controller was also pretty close to where this all happened, and I had the solar controller actually tested, hooked up to the batteries in the shop, and it fired up right away. There's no errors. The Victron stuff is like full of really cool stuff. If there's anything even slightly out of the ordinary with that stuff, it lets you know right away. So I have no reason to believe that there was anything ruined in that. I did have to order a couple of new fuses. If you look at the photos, and maybe I'll try to put them on here again, you can clearly see that they're melted and destroyed. Not because they themselves failed, but just the immense heat that was coming off the bottom of this while it was happening just melted them and ruined them. The smart shunt from Victron was reading when I connected to it, actually, while this was all sort of still in here, with the damaged components wired up as they were. It actually fired up on my phone. It was telling me the voltage on the batteries. The Renogy one that's up top there was telling me that the batteries were okay and everything was measuring fine. The smart shunt itself, though, the one side of it was melted pretty good. And although it was functioning, it was my opinion that it was probably not a good idea to try and continue to use it, just in case there was something, within the melted section that was on its last legs now because of this. So I've replaced it. None of this stuff is here. So basically the job for today now, after closing this video off, is to repair this wall. Cover it back up with, I've got some 1/8 inch rubber mat that we'll use to cover everything up and just kind of give me a fresh surface to start reconnecting all this stuff. And then I'm just waiting now for shipments to come in of the parts that were destroyed, so that we can start putting it all back together again. But there's a lengthy, drawn out sort of my interpretation of what I think happened here. I am not an electrician, so I am fairly handy with this kind of stuff, and I would say that I do have like a better understanding than the average person as to how this all works. But I am not an electrician, and definitely if you're going to start doing this kind of stuff, you have to, I guess, accept the fact that something unforeseen could happen. Unfortunately, this is a hard way to learn, but I do believe that my biggest mistake here was to not replace that converter, that buck converter, when that spark happened, and then probably the mistake even before that was to have purchased it in the first place, having all the feedback on Amazon about how it was essentially a piece of junk. So that's it for this one. I don't really know what to call this. It's not really part 4. It's just kind of, I guess, a what the hell happened video. But going from here now, I'm going to start working on the next video, which will be repairing the damage and getting this all working again.